I'm Erin. Welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new here. Today I'm going to be sharing all of the kids' picture books that I gave a 5-star rating in 2023. I started reading picture books in the summer of 2023 as a research project. I had written drafts for a couple of picture books that I wanted to write for myself. I was getting ready to start illustrating them, and I kind of just wanted to get an idea for what kind of picture books were being published right now, which ones were popular, and what kind of illustration styles were being featured in them, what kind of stories were being told. And so I went to the library and I brought home a bag of picture books and I started reading through them. And I realized that reading them was just so much fun. They're so bright and vibrant and colorful, and they tell such hopeful stories, and I just really enjoyed reading them. So I kept reading them. I would take a bag of them back to the library and bring home another one periodically here and there. And every so often on a Saturday, I would just spend an hour reading picture books and kind of paying attention to what kind of stories they were telling. And in doing that, I ended up reading well over 100 picture books. I think I ended up reading 135 of them or something between summer and winter of 2023. And I had about 50 of them that I loved enough to give a 5-star rating. And I just wanted to share them with you here. Maybe you also like reading picture books. Maybe you have kids or nieces, nephews, or grandkids, and you are interested in good picture books as well. So I ended up checking them all out from the library, and I have them here to show you. First, there were a couple that I wasn't able to get from the library this go round because other people have them checked out, and I did want to mention 2 of those. One was called A Day with No Words. I believe it was written by Tiffany Hammond, and it's about an autistic boy who communicates without his voice. He uses a device to communicate, and it was just a really heartwarming story, and it was nice to see an autistic character represented in a picture book. The other one that I couldn't get, that I don't have here right now, is called The Library Fish, and I don't remember who wrote it, but I remember that it made me feel just like I was having so much fun when I was reading it, and it made me smile, and I really loved it. So if you haven't read either of those, they are 2 that I would recommend that I don't have to show you. Starting with the books that I do have here to show you, I have a book called Luna and Me by Jenny Sue Kostecki Shaw. It's the true story of a girl who lived in a tree to save a forest, and I thought that this was such a sweet book. It's about a girl who decides that she wants to save this redwood tree that is scheduled to be torn down, and she lived in the tree for 738 days. Really remarkable story, and one that I think is worth sharing. I'm kind of going through my biographies or like stories about specific people in history stack right now, so that's where we are. This one's called Hedy Lamar's Double Life, Hollywood Legend and Brilliant Inventor. Hedy Lamar was an old Hollywood actress, but she was also an inventor, and she also wasn't credited for all of her inventions. Some of her inventions were kind of co-opted, and this book tells that story in a way that's really appealing to kids. I also found 2 books about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. One is called Ruth Objects, The Life of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and the other is called I Dissent, Ruth Bader Ginsburg Makes Her Mark. Both of these were really good introductions to the life of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Then I have Lights, Camera, Alice, The Thrilling True Adventures of the First Woman Filmmaker by Mara Rockcliffe. This, I thought, was just such a sweet story. I had never heard of Alice before, and it was really cool just kind of being able to be introduced to her and her work through such a easily readable and consumable story. A Lady Has the Floor by Kate Hannigan. This is a story about Belva Lockwood, who is one of the first women in the US to receive a law degree and to go on working in politics. The Only Woman in the Photo, Frances Perkins and Her New Deal for America by Kathleen Kroll. This book was so good, and I was so fascinated to learn more about Frances Perkins. I ended up actually checking out a long-form biography about her from the library, and I'm really looking forward to reading it. This book is really excellent. Marjorie Saves the Everglades, the story of Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. written by Sandra Neal Wallace and illustrated by Rebecca Gibbon. I loved the illustration style in this one. It's so charming and sweet and very colorful, and I really liked learning more about Marjorie's story as well. Then we have To Boldly Go, How Nichelle Nichols and Star Trek Helped Advance Civil Rights by Angela Dalton and Lauren Semmer. This was such a cool book. I picked up this book because I have recently become a Star Trek fan. After my dad passed away, my husband and I started watching the different Star Trek series, mostly because my dad used to enjoy watching Star Trek when I was a kid. His favorite series was The Next Generation, so I started watching that one, and we've since watched most of the other ones. I wasn't actually a huge fan of the original series as much. I thought it had kind of a different feel to it that I just didn't jive with as much, but I have ended up really enjoying the other series, and so when I saw this, I picked it up, and I thought it was really interesting to hear about Nichelle's experience with making the Star Trek original series show and some of the things that happened during that time period. So this is one that I do recommend. Who Says Women Can't Be Doctors? The Story of Elizabeth Blackwell by Tanya Lee Stone. Elizabeth Blackwell was the first female doctor in America, and this is an introduction to her story and how she came to become one of the first female doctors here in the US. Brave Jane Austen, reader, writer, author, rebel by Lisa Pliskau. Pliskau? Not sure. But obviously this is about Jane Austen and an introduction to her in a way that's really easily understandable for kids. This was really good. I loved the artwork in this one. It's called Greta and the Giants, inspired by Greta Thunberg's Stand to Save the World by Zoe Tucker and Zoe Persico. This book is just a really inspiring look at Greta and her passion for climate justice, and I really enjoyed it. The artwork's really beautiful and colorful, and I think kids would enjoy this one too. Digging for Words, Jose Alberto Gutierrez and the Library He Built by Angela Burke Kunkel. That's fun to say. This is about a man who basically built a library with castaway books, throwaway books, and the way he impacted his community by doing that. It's a really beautiful story. Then we have Nature's Friend, The Gwen Frostic Story by Lindsay McDivitt. This is a really cool story. I had never heard of Gwen Frostic before, but she was a botanical illustrator or a nature illustrator, and her work was really lovely. I ended up looking it up after I read this book, and I thought it was really beautiful. The next book is called A Whale of a Mistake by Ioana Hobai. This book is about how we can handle our emotional responses to knowing that we've made a mistake, and how we can let that weigh us down or we can move forward. It's just a really sweet book. I liked it. And then this book was one of my favorite picture books I've ever read. It's called Woohoo, You're Doing Great by Sandra Boynton. This book just made me feel good. It made me laugh. It's just so silly. It's like a hype man in a book. I don't know if you follow her, but there's a woman on Instagram who has a handmade clothing business. Her name's Justice, and her account is called Thread and Sprout. And she used to do stories every day. Just sometimes she still does them, but she used to do them really consistently, where she would just kind of show up and show you her cute outfit for the day and tell you that you're doing great and smile and don't forget to move your body and drink water and like do the things that are good for you today, and just really happy self-care vibes. And this book really embodied that same kind of mood, and I just really loved it. Then there's a series of books that I just really enjoyed. I read them, and after I finished each one, I just laughed, and I was so amused by them. They're all by John Klassen. The first is called I Want My Hat Back. The second is We Found a Hat. And the third is This Is Not My Hat. A couple of these at least have won awards. This one's won the Caldecott, and this one has won the Theodore Seuss Geisel Honor Book. They're just really amusing and funny and silly books that I think kids would like too. This one's called Memory Jars by Caldecott honoree Vera Brosgol. This is just a really sweet story about a girl who gathers her memories in jars, and I really enjoyed it. And then there's one here also called The First Note, the story of Do Re Mi by Julie Andrews and Emma Walton Hamilton, who I believe is Julie Andrews' daughter. Yep. If you've ever seen the Sound of Music movie in which Julie Andrews starred, you will probably really enjoy this one too. Next, I have a little stack of books that are largely about nature or gardening, and there were a few that I really liked. The first was called The Garden We Share by Zoe Tucker. Carl, Get Out of the Garden, Carl Linnaeus and the Naming of Everything by Anita Sanchez. This was a really sweet introduction to Carl Linnaeus, who is one of the people responsible for a lot of the botanical taxonomic classifications that we use still today to identify plants. If you're into gardening or herbalism, then you might be aware that plants have multiple common names around the world. A plant that is called woundwort, for example, here in the US, might be a completely different plant than what somebody in another country or state or even city calls woundwort. And so to kind of avoid confusion between people who were talking about plants in various capacities, usually medicine, a means of classifying them by one botanical name came about, and Carl Linnaeus was really instrumental in setting that up and getting everything kind of named. Most of the names in his system that we still use today are in Latin. And there's a book called The Circles in the Sky by Carl James Mountford. The artwork in this book is so beautiful. It's a book that's kind of about how we can handle sad things and grief and loss and the cycle of life, told more through the perspective of animals, and I just thought it was a really heartwarming and sweet book. The Mystery of the Monarchs by Erica Meza is a story about how monarchs migrate. This one also talked about the ongoing efforts to track monarch butterfly migration as well. Then there's a book called Logan's Greenhouse, written by Janae Brownwood and illustrated by Samara Hardy. Janae Brownwood is a Black author. I really loved this book. I loved that there's disability representation and diversity in the different characters that are represented in the illustrations, and I just really liked the story as well. This book is called Wangari's Trees of Peace, A True Story from Africa by Jeanette Winter. This book is about a woman named Wangari whose region of Kenya was kind of in a state of upheaval, and she saw that a lot of the trees were being torn down, and she decided that she was going to plant trees. She became an environmentalist, she won the Nobel Peace Prize, and this story tells a story about how just one person's efforts can spread and make a difference and start a movement. It was a really inspiring story. The 1619 Projects Born on the Water by Hannah Nicole Jones and Renee Watson. This book is really sobering and a little bit heavy, but it's also really well done, and I do think that it is told in a way that is appropriate for kids. Then we have Soulway, which is a book I picked up originally because I saw that it was showing up on banned book lists, and I didn't understand why a picture book would elicit the efforts of people who are interested in banning books, which I'm completely against. And so I read it, and it's a really beautiful story, and I recommend that you read it too. This book is called With Lots of Love by Jenny Torres Sanchez. It's about a girl who immigrates with her family to the US and ends up missing some of the things from home, some of her relatives that are still back in her home country, and she learns that love goes with us everywhere. We don't leave it behind, and it's just a really sweet, heartwarming story. Dreamers by Yuyi Morales. This book is both about immigration and loving books and finding home and friends and books and new places, and I really enjoyed it. Platanos Are Love by Alyssa Reynoso Morris. This book is a really sweet book about food and family and love and embracing our cultural heritage, and I loved it too. A Land of Books, Dreams of Young Mexica Word Painters by Duncan Tonatia. This book is about how people used to make some of the first books and how they cataloged their history and their stories in written form, and it's really beautiful and inspiring, and it also dives into some of the troubling history that goes along with colonialism and destroying history and records and heritage, and I learned a lot reading this book. It was really good. Then we have Dunia and the Magic Seeds by Maria Zaref. This is a book about a girl who is fleeing her home with her family as refugees during a time of war, and the seeds that she brings with her. It's a story about resilience and keeping parts of us and our families and our histories and our stories and how we carry those things with us. This is another book I really enjoyed. It's called How to Write a Poem by Newbery medalist Kwame Alexander. The artwork in this book is really cool. It's kind of a collage style artwork, as you can see on the cover, that carries on throughout the book, and I just really loved some of the lines in this. I loved how inspiring it was, how doable it makes writing a poem feel, and I love that more kids might try writing poems after reading this book. Then I have a couple of books about civil rights movements. One is called Sometimes People March by Tessa Allen, and the other is called Fighting for Yes, the story of disability rights activist Judith Human by Marianne Kaka-Leffler. Both of these are really good books. This one talks more about disability justice and disability rights and the ADA, and this one is more of just a general civil rights in general. We're all in this together. We all are fighting for each other, and the various reasons why people might march together. This is called The Courage of the Little Hummingbird, A Tale Told Around the World by Leah Henderson. This is a story about a little hummingbird who plays a very small role in solving a problem that threatens their entire community, and how on their own they wouldn't have the ability to really fix the problem, but because they took action, it inspires other animals in the community to take action too, and together they're stronger and they're able to come up with a solution. It's a really sweet book. This book is called Can You See It by Susan Verde. It's a really sweet book about kind of paying attention and tuning in and living in the moment, and I really liked it. This one's called Whatever Comes Tomorrow by Rebecca Garden Levington, and I think the title tells you what this book is about pretty well. I love the colorful illustrations in this one, and it's just got a great message. One Girl by Andrea Beatty. This one would be really suitable, I think, for early readers who are just starting to learn to read, and it's very readable and easy to read. Some of the pages only have a couple of words on them, but it still tells a story about how one person can make a difference. Along that same vein, Just One Little Light by Kat Ye also tells a story about how the light you bring to the world is important and needed and can impact people around you. Brave Little Bird by Annie Silvestro is a book that actually made me tear up a little bit. I really loved it. It was so sweet. And I'm not going to tell you too much about it because I don't want to spoil it as you go into it, but I do recommend reading this one if you can get access to it. All from a Walnut by Amy Joan Paquette. This book is a really sweet story about how doing something really small can produce something really big and grand that other people can enjoy for generations maybe, and how tending something and caring for something is really important. Mindful Mr. Sloth by Katie Hudson. This is a sweet and silly story about how sometimes slowing down and just focusing on living in the moment instead of hurrying through your day is what can allow you to really enjoy life. Finding My Dance by Rhea Thundercloud is a story about a real woman named Rhea Thundercloud, the author, and how she connects with dance through her ancestral and cultural heritage, and it's a really beautiful story. Key Punamuk by Danielle Greendeer, Anthony Perry, and Alexis Bunteen is a story about the first Thanksgiving in the US, but told from an Indigenous perspective, and I really enjoyed reading this book. I think it would be a great one to add to your library if you are a teacher or a parent of young children. My Powerful Hair by Carol Lindstrom, who also wrote We Are Water Protectors, and I think she wrote some other books too. She's a member of the Ojibwe tribe, and both of these books offer really beautiful, inspiring insights into her culture and her heritage and Indigenous values. I really enjoyed them. And the last book in this big stack is called The First Blade of Sweetgrass, a Native American story by Suzanne Greenlaw. If you have read Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer, I think you'll really enjoy this book. It's just a really sweet story about a family and their connection with sweetgrass, and I really enjoyed it. If you're still here watching, thank you for sticking around. If you also love reading picture books or you've enjoyed some, I'd love to hear about some of your favorites, your recommendations. If you've read any of these and liked them, I'd also like to know that too. So please feel free to hang out in the comments, and I will see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching. Bye!